October 14th, 1943. A day that would forever be etched in the annals of aerial warfare as Black Thursday. The skies over Europe were a brutal theater of war. And for the American 8th Air Force, this day was the ultimate test of courage, skill, and sheer will to survive. Our story begins with the ambitious plan to cripple Germany's war machine by targeting the ball-bearing factories in Schweinfurt. Why ball bearings? Simple. Nearly every piece of German military hardware, from tanks to aircraft, relied on them. Take out the factories, and you could grind their production to a halt. The mission was audacious. A deep penetration raid into the heart of Germany without fighter escort for the majority of the journey. The plan was for a massive formation of B-17 flying fortresses to strike hard and fast. But from the moment they crossed into enemy airspace, things went horribly wrong. The German Luftwaffe, the formidable air force of the Third Reich, was waiting. They had honed their tactics, learned from previous encounters, and were ready to unleash hell upon the American bombers. Wave after wave of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf 190s swarmed the bomber stream. They came from every direction. Guns blazing, rockets streaking through the sky. The air became a chaotic whirlwind of tracer fire, flak explosions, and falling aircraft. The B-17s, designed to be tough, flying fortresses bristling with machine guns, were being systematically torn apart. For the young men inside, it was a waking nightmare. They fought back with everything they had. Their .50 caliber guns chattering endlessly, but the odds were overwhelming. This brings us to one specific group, a dozen B-17s, that found themselves separated from the main formation. Alone and vulnerable, they became the prime target for a concentrated German attack. It was a terrifying position to be in. Without the protective firepower of the larger bomber box, they were like a lone wildebeest surrounded by a pride of lions. The German pilots, sensing a kill, closed in with relentless aggression. They flew dangerously close, sometimes passing right through the American formation, their cannons ripping through the thin aluminum skin of the bombers. But this is where the story takes a turn. The crews of these 12 Bs, they didn't break. Instead, they did something remarkable. They tightened their formation, flying so close their wingtips nearly touched. This wasn't just a defensive maneuver, it was an act of defiance. By closing ranks, they created a concentrated cone of defensive fire, a porcupine of machine guns that made it incredibly dangerous for any German fighter to get close. Every gunner in every plane was covering another, turning their small, isolated group into a single, formidable fighting unit. Imagine the scene. A dozen bombers, engines roaring, trailing smoke from previous hits, surrounded by a swarm of enemy fighters. The German pilots Ciso and Ed Assis were used to picking off. They would typically attack from the front, the 12 o'clock high position, where the bombers' defensive firepower was weakest. But this small group of B-17s anticipated this. They coordinated their fire, with gunners calling out targets, creating a wall of lead that few could penetrate. One German pilot later described the experience as flying into a hailstorm of bullets. They expected an easy victory, but instead, they were met with a level of resistance that was both shocking and deadly. Fighters that swooped in for the kill were suddenly shredded by the combined firepower of multiple bombers. The hunters became the disciplined fire from the B-17s was so effective that several German planes were seen spiraling down, trailing smoke and flames. The battle raged for what must have felt like an eternity. Inside the bombers, the noise was deafening. The roar of the engines, the constant hammering of the guns, the shriek of incoming cannon shells, and the concussive thump of flak exploding nearby. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and hydraulic fluid. Men were wounded, some killed at their posts, but the others fought on. They tended to their comrades, replaced gunners who had fallen, and kept their weapons firing. Against all odds, this small group of 12 bombers held their ground. They had turned a desperate situation into a masterclass in defensive flying and teamwork. The German fighters, having expended much of their fuel and ammunition and having suffered unexpected losses, were eventually forced to break off their attack. The sky, once filled with chaos and death, grew quiet again. But the ordeal wasn't over. The surviving bombers, battered and bruised, still had to make it to drop their payload and then face the long, perilous journey home. Yet, they pressed on. They reached the target, released their bombs on the smoking factories below, and turned for home. The return flight was another test of endurance, flying on a prayer, with crews doing everything they could to keep their crippled birds in the air. They limped back towards England. The story of these 12 B-17s became a legend within the 8th Air Force. It was a testament to the fact that even when outnumbered and outgunned, courage, discipline, and teamwork could turn the tide of battle. While Black Thursday as a whole was a devastating day for the Americans, with 60 bombers lost. Their actions that day didn't just save their own lives. They sent a clear message to the Luftwaffe. The American bombers were not an easy target. They would fight back, and they would fight back hard. This single engagement, a small part of a much larger battle, demonstrated the sheer grit and determination that would ultimately help win the war in the air over Europe. It's a powerful reminder of the incredible sacrifices made by the greatest generation. Thank you for watching. If you found this story of heroism and survival as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tailies from history. We'll see you in the next one.